by the time we get to Sukkot, or maybe Pesach, we'll have this all figured out, like a finely oiled machine. And then we'll have to figure out something completely different. That's just how life is. It's incredible. We don't always know what's the saying, and how many of you have quoted it back to me. We get to the place where we're supposed to be when we're supposed to be there. And it's interesting that I say that this morning, because this morning, I talked to you a little bit about space, about journey, how we move through it. In the midst of all of what's been going on, there's been a lot of upheaval about racial injustice and how do we hear other voices that are different from us. And one of the websites that was recommended to me by first my daughter Anna and then by many others is one called Hey Alma. And it just has these amazing posts. And so I went there one day and I was starting to look for them, and it wasn't just about Judaism and race. Actually, it had film reviews and all sorts of other stories. One of the film reviews I clicked on, I was curious. It's a new film called American Pickle, and it's on HBO Max. And so I want to state, first of all, I don't have HBO Max. I don't have Peacock. I just found that I have access to Apple TV. So, I'm a Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime kind of guy. So I have not seen this movie. And I'm not going to do a review. I'm not going to do an extensive explanation. But the basic storyline, it's a Jewish storyline. And it cracked me up. It made me cringe. It made me shake my head of what new chutzpah can we find in this new year. So American Pickle, it's a movie by Seth Rogen, and Seth Rogen actually plays multiple characters in this. That's part of his shtick. And I said it's a Jewish story because really it's a story that relates to a lot of us. It's about a Jewish couple, Herschel and Sarah, and they are in Eastern Europe in the early 20th century. And of course, there are pogroms, but this is how my family got to the United States. And they left and they come to the shores of the United States. They come through Ellis Island. The Statue of Liberty greets them, and they are on their way to an American dream. Now, here's where it gets to be even more of a Jewish story, because Herschel gets a job in a pickle factory, working as the rat killer. Yes, that's right. He's the one that's killing all the vermin that might eat the pickles. However, one fateful day, as Herschel is there killing things in a place that's supposed to make food, he falls into the pickle vat, and he is sealed inside. 100 years pass. Two kids, finding an abandoned pickle warehouse factory, go in with their drone. They open the vat, and there is Herschel, perfectly preserved, tweed vest and all. 100 years inside the preservation of a pickle barrel, and he comes back out into the world. It's fantastic. It's absurd. It's crazy. We actually have a story of Honi the circle drawer who plants a tree, goes to sleep for 7 years, and wakes up to figure out what's going on. That was told in the Middle Ages. Why can't Seth Rogen tell that story now? So here we have Herschel pulling a Captain America, Steve Rogers, popping out after 100 years preserved in take that, Captain America. Captain America, you can save the world, stopping a nuclear weapon from destroying the world, falling into the ice and being preserved from super soldier serum for 100 years or 7 years or however many years it was in the comic. But we've got Herschel. He falls into a vat of pickles by accident and is preserved for 100 years. That's Jewish ingenuity, or Jewish accident. I'm not sure which. He comes out after the 100 years. He comes out, and I'm getting that image from the Captain America movie where Captain America is running through and Steve Rogers running through Times Square, not able to figure out what's going on. I'm sure Herschel had that same sense of dislocation. Wait, what do I do? Where do I go? Who am I? This is a very different world than when I fell into that vat of pickles. And then I know what you're really asking. Were they sours, half sours? How much garlic? How much dill? I'm sure those are some of your burning questions. So there is Herschel. He comes out, and what does he do? He looks for his mishpucha. He wants to know where his family is. And all he finds is his great-grandson, Ben. then has been orphaned. His parents died in a car crash. And that's where the story then starts to unfold, because wouldn't you know, Ben and Herschel end up in competition. They end up with Jewish angst and with dark humor, because what happens, Herschel decides to go into the rival pickle business, battling his own great-grandson over Jewish tradition and family memories. It is over the top, as I said. I didn't know whether to cringe, whether to laugh while cringing and crying all at the same time. It's a very Jewish scenario. And yet, when I first read it and was thinking about it and laughing about it, I said, that's not High Holy Days. In fact, I even sent it to my dad. My dad's wondering, wait, how is that a High Holy Day story? That's shtick. That's slapstick. That's Jewish humor. That's not days of awe and reflection. And yet, the more I thought about it, the more I thought about that story of the American pickle, something just hit me. Because in fact, that story of Herschel falling into the pickle vat and coming out 100 years later to try to interact with the world and figure out his family and his great-grandson, it's a very strange and incredible mirror image of the Akedah, of the binding of Isaac. Both stories are about a bubble. For Herschel, he's the outside of the bubble. We don't know what happens to him in that vat. Nothing happens in that. He sits there and gets pickled. We see what happens to him before he goes in, and we see what happens after he comes back. But on the mirror image, the flip side of that is the binding of Isaac, the Akedah, which we will read in our Torah this morning. There are Abraham and Isaac very much in a bubble. Think about it. Nisa Adonai et Avraham. God is going to test Abraham, and he says, take your son, your only son, the one that you love, Isaac, and you're going to go and you're going to sacrifice him. Abraham even sleeps on it, but then he gets Isaac, and he gets the wood, and he gets the chopping implement, and he gets everything together with their servants, and they head off onto this journey. And they travel for 3 days, and they tell the other 2 servants, hang out there, one of whom might have even been Ishmael. And then they go on, and there they are on the mountain for all of the drama of the story of the binding of Isaac. Right? There's Abraham ready to sacrifice Isaac. Isaac has said, wait, Dad, what are you doing? Are you sure you want to do this? And then what is that moment when Abraham has the knife ready to sacrifice his son? An angel calls out, saying, no, this is not how it's supposed to go. Sacrifice the ram in place of Isaac. And then, with all of the blessings God offers and all of the discussions, and this is going to be a holy place, and you're going to have blessings, and Abraham returns to Beersheba alone. Or at least we don't know if he returns to Isaac. Whereas Herschel, we see him go into the vat and we see him come out of the vat. All we see of the Akedah is what happens in the bubble. We don't actually know. There are no details what happens between Abraham and Isaac as father and son after they come out off the mountain in the return of life. There is such mystery and scant details. There is so much speculation. There is midrash, and there is wrestling as we, as a tradition, have tried to understand that Akedah and the relationships that were impacted. Abraham and Isaac, even Sarah, who stayed behind outside of that bubble. And so here on this Rosh HaShanah, on this Shabbat, it would be so easy just to say, here's a bubble. This Herschel's getting us to think about the Akedah as a bubble. What do we learn from the Akedah about being in a bubble? But I also know that it's not an intellectual exercise. It's not a spiritual exercise. It's not just, oh, here's the Akedah. Rabbi, you need to come up with something to teach from it, because this is not a normal Rosh Hashanah. We are in the most profound, incredible, overwhelming bubble in so many ways. Bubbles, and I talk about that place where we are sealed into an experience. We know that's all over Jewish life. We see it over and over and over again in our tradition. We have the Akedah, there's the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, we have the journey of 40 years through the wilderness, there's Jacob's trip and journey to Haran and back, Elijah's trip at Horeb, or even if you want to talk Jewish bubbles, there's Shimon Bar Yochai and his son who goes into the cave. We see those stories over and over again. That's where the American Pickle story comes from in so many ways. We also know that we have personal moments of bubble, places where we get locked in to these spaces and journey where everything else goes away and we just have that experience separated and cut off. We have moments of trips, we have moments of career, we have moments of family, all kinds of experiences. And I will tell you, I read it in my dad's sermon last night, his moment, like so many of my moments, my most profound, incredible, and humbling moments of a rabbi have been standing with families at the beginning of life and at the end of life. And I always say in those moments, how often I've said it, and I say it over and over again, but it's because it's true and I see it. When we're at the end of life, how many times have I said to a family, this moment is like the same mirrored image, that moment when we welcome life into the world, when you're giving birth, that moment when you're waiting and sitting by while someone you love is at the end of their life. We know we are in that moment. We know that here we are, and we know that there is something coming, that is going to happen where life is going to be completely different on the other side. But we don't know what that's actually going to feel like. So how often we have to stop and just be in that place, in that moment, because we have to put our light and love into that moment because we don't know what it's going to feel like on the other side. So we have all of these bubbles, all of these experiences where we know we are in the midst of something and there is a threshold on the other side. We have these stories to draw this wisdom from. And yet this Rosh Hashanah, this year, it still feels so different. Because it's not just we're about to give birth or my loved one is at the end of life. It's not just the story of Shimon Bar Yochai or Jacob on his journey to Haran. This bubble, this place where we are in history feels so different. I think part of it is because all of us are in this bubble together. But that's the hard part because we're not together. I'm talking to a camera. It's Rosh Hashanah morning and there's 3 cars in the parking lot at our synagogue and there's no one in the seats here. Y'all are watching me and you are on your computers in your home. We are so physically separated from each other. We are trying our best and we still feel hamstrung, and at worst sometimes it feels like we are completely cut off. It is such a hard and difficult and challenging time. How many of you have said, I am just done with this, ready to go back, ready to go forward, ready to go somewhere? Here we are in this bubble. And I think that's part of this challenge, because we actually don't know what the other side is going to look like. We don't know when we're going to get to the other side. And if we're also, there is, I say it honestly, with fear and with trembling, we don't even know if there is another side. I know I keep looking around and thinking, is this the new normal? Here we are, like Abraham on that mountain, dealing with, challenging, facing that. And like Abraham and Isaac and all of that experience, it is for us. We could sit and we can lament. But here on this Rosh Hashanah, in this space where we are trying to understand this world we live in, I would tell you this is a very different way of looking at the Akedah. That maybe not just about getting out of our bubble, but maybe it has wisdom as we are here in this place. Because as Abraham and Isaac are on that mountain, wrestling with, facing with, listening to angels, facing mortality, facing immortality, facing God, We in this way are so doing that, having that experience. And that is our challenge on this Rosh Hashanah. It's this huge question that I have for us, for you. It's even for me. How are we going to emerge from this bubble? And what do we do in our bubble to get ready for the other side? And I ask questions. I don't have answers, but I do have the questions. There are the questions that Abraham and Isaac asked, that God was asking. As we are here in this place facing these incredible challenges in this year, who will we bring with us? What are we going to release, to let go of? What are we going to sacrifice, and what are we not going to sacrifice? And most important, who are the better angels that we're going to listen to? And I say that as whether it's an angel for heaven or humans made in God's image who just cross our paths. This story, the Akedah, Abraham and Isaac only get to the other side because they listened to that better angel. And finally, just as Abraham and Isaac did on that mountain, what is the place of holiness and transcendent connection that we will find? So even as we are here in this moment, we find that place, we make that connection, we feel yirah, and we find strength and inspiration and something powerful, incredible to focus on being our best from. While we are in this bubble, we can search out and can we wrestle with these questions. If we do that work, if we ask those questions, if we wrestle with those questions, it's avodah, sacred service to the divine, sacred labor, regardless of whether, when, and whether and how we get out of that bubble. We will already be working towards our best selves, and then in the process seeking and finding holiness for ourselves, holiness in our relationships, holiness in our community, and holiness in our world. Amen. Shana Tova, Shabbat Shalom.